Hey everybody, Ed here with the Digital Digest, and today I wanted to share a quick video about what I currently have in my gear bag, and that's because I get a lot of questions from subscribers about what I actually am shooting with rather than just reviewing. So you can see I've got 3 different cameras, all from Sony, all based around the E-mount, and some are full frame, some are aps-c, some have full frame glass, and another one doesn't. So let's get right into it. I've got the A7R. This is Sony's at least still flagship 36 megapixel full frame mirrorless interchangeable lens camera, built-in high quality EVF. I've got the FE Zeiss 24-70 constant f4 aperture zoom lens on here with the hood attached, and it's still a very small profile when you take into account that this is a full frame 36 megapixel camera that traditionally would require a lot more mass, and that's even with regard to the zoom lens. It's close to being the same size as the competition, but a little bit smaller, and that's something that Sony had to retain. That's why it has an f4 rating rather than being faster. Sony went with that trade-off, and you'll notice as I go through all of these cameras that Sony stuck with that f4 quite deliberately for that reason. In the middle, I've got the NEX 5R, a throwback. This is Sony's one of their first NEX cameras to bring Wi-Fi on board, access to the Play memory store, as well as their hybrid autofocus system, something that is missing from the A7R. You can get that in the A7, but still the A7 and A7R are far from being fast cameras. They're all about their image quality in their form factor. Here we've got a nice balance of both. That's what the aps-c line of cameras from Sony is all about. So with the 5R, I've got something that literally is pocketable. I have the E-mount. Again, this is a native E-mount lens. All of these lenses are, but this is an aps-c lens, 10-18, also constant f4, but it actually works with my A7R, and I've covered this in the past. It works relatively competently, but within a limited range. I'm not going to get into that, and also the actual rating, that f4 rating, is different on a full frame rather than an aps-c. Also not going to get into that, but here I've got my wide angle solution. It's even pocketable, and then I even have the selfie, dare I need it, and that's a really nice feature to have when paired with a wide angle lens when you do need to take a self-portrait and you want to get that scenery in the background where you are and really bring the entire feel of what you're experiencing to the image. And that's not something I can accomplish, at least in a selfie manner, with either of the models flanking it. So that's just something noteworthy, and Sony's continued to integrate the fully 180-degree rotation screen on brand new cameras offerings like the RX100 Mark III, which I think is going to be a knockout. But that's not an interchangeable lens camera. So moving on to the far right, then I've got the A6000, which even though right now it's rocking the FE, this is a native, again, full frame E-mount lens, much like the Zeiss over here on the left mounted on the R. This lens, constant f4, also has optical steady shot or stabilization, which is great. That's something also in the Zeiss 24-70, and that's another reason I think it's an incredible lens and doesn't deserve a lot of the negative criticism that it has received, because it does really well on the still and video side, something that can't be said for a lot of the competition. But this lens just is a stunner when paired with the brand new A6000, and this latest member to what used to be the NEX line, now the Alpha line of cameras, like the 5R right here in the middle, has an aps-c sensor, 24 megapixels like the NEX 7, but it's a lot more in build and price point like the NEX 6. Basically an incredible upgrade and update to the aps-c lineup of cameras from Sony, because you now have 11 frames per second continuous autofocus, and that's why when paired with a high quality zoom lens like this 70-200 f4, which is full frame, so you're going to get even more range with the A6000, you're going to get very impressive results. Now, the A6000 is far from perfect, and even though it claims to have that 11 frames per second continuous autofocus, you're not going to get 11 keepers. Still, it is the fastest mirrorless camera, really second to the Panasonic GH4. And considering the GH4 body alone goes for $1,700 and the A6000 is already discounted, well, to below $600, it started at $650, you can see why the A6000, even though it doesn't have 4K capture capability, is really an amazing value. It also has Sony's Play Memory Store, Wi-Fi, NFC, a whole host of features that make it even more compelling. So this is currently what I have in my bag. It really covers everything. In the event that I do actually need 4K video, that's when the camera this is being filmed on right now that I'm pointing at, the FDR AX100, comes into play. Otherwise, I don't really find myself needing 4K out in the field that often. So that's why what you see before you really covers every single base for me. So whether I want, the pretty much perfect zero compromise with regard to image quality, walk around camera where I don't have to pull off the lens, but if I want to throw the zoom on here, I'm going to also get amazing results from this FE 70-200G glass right here on the A7R. In fact, it was kind of built for it and the A7S. Not that it doesn't perform very well on the A7 as well, because it does, but that 11 frame per second continuous autofocus from the A6000 just begs to have a piece of quality glass like this attached to it. Now, most users will not buy, this package, but because I did purchase this lens for my A7R, it just happens to work out quite nicely. And all of the weight you see here, traditionally, if I was going to be using larger bodies from yesteryear, or even current bodies from Nikon or Canon, I won't include Sony in this because clearly they're giving us another option that's legitimate at this point. It would just be a backpack rather than a bag. That's my best way of putting it. And in terms of compromise with performance, well, everyone knows what compromise, what trade-off you get. No camera from any manufacturer is perfect, including what you see before here clearly. But for me at least, this has been a really solid trio. The 5R just retains that really compact form factor. You're not going to get this image and video quality, unfortunately, from any Sony camera out there right now in the Alpha lineup. So that's why I've held on to it, unlike the NEX6, which the A6000 just kicks to the curb, again, unless budget is critical to you. And then the A7R, it hasn't really come down that much in price, but still, show me another camera with a full-frame sensor of this quality. And while the FE lineup is only growing, it's still in its infancy, I can assure you Sony is 100% behind it because it's part of the E-mount, and that is where everything seems to be going for them. So a great trio, as I mentioned before. I've got my speed here, my wide angle and very small profile form factor. And by the way, of course, this lens can work. All of these lenses can essentially be interchanged, which is another beautiful part about this system and the different form factors we've seen Sony bring to the market with time. So the E-mount really has become a great mount, in my opinion. Still, it does get a lot of flack for not having a lot of lenses, but really FE is the only area that doesn't have a bevy of lenses right now, and that's because FE just launched this past year. So if it isn't already clear, this is what's in the bag and should be for the foreseeable future, at least until Sony brings me something like the A7R rather than the S that can internally capture 4K, and I think we're still a long way away from that, considering the heat and a whole variety of different impediments right now technologically that they are facing. Granted, Panasonic's done it in the GH4. That camera is a stunner. I just wish it was full frame, and that's where I'll leave that. Any questions or comments, please feel free to post them, and of course, as usual, please feel free to subscribe. Later.